Hello and welcome to part 3 in a series of videos that I'm putting out this week where I break down all the fights taking place at UFC on ESPN 3 from a betting perspective. Now I've already covered 6 fights taking place on this card, which you can find in parts 1 and 2 of this video. I will leave a link to both those videos in the description below, and in today's video I'll be busting through another 3 fights. Now don't forget, this is a very busy weekend for us. We've got KSW 48 taking place on Saturday, as well as Bellator, Fitch versus Rory McDonald, and then we've got the UFC, the cherry on top of the cake, Jacare versus Hermanson in the main event. So a very busy week for us. It's Thursday right now, and MMA betting for this week is about to get super busy. I'm about to go underground. I'm about to develop huge bags under my eyes. I haven't left the house since Monday because I've been chained to this desk researching fights, and I am almost done researching this UFC card. I hope to finish my research on the UFC card today so I can then move on to researching KSW and Bellator. So if you like these videos I'm putting out, guys, if you appreciate the content, please hit the like button below. It makes a big difference. It helps my videos get in front of way more people and then helps me to attract more subscribers. So every single like makes a big difference. But let's get right into the first fight that I want to talk about today, which is Roosevelt Roberts against Thomas Gifford. So this is a fight that is flying under the radar, most probably because these are two guys that most people wouldn't have heard of before. I certainly hadn't heard of Thomas Gifford before I began researching this event, and also because Roosevelt Roberts is a relatively big favourite, although his opening odds were around about 1.40, which would have been kind of nice, but he's obviously been absolutely smashed since then, for reasons that maybe we will discuss in this breakdown. So what's interesting about this fight is that both guys are lightweights and they both have the same sort of body type. Roosevelt Roberts is a tall, lean, 6'1" lightweight, and so is Thomas Gifford. He's also 6'1", and these guys kind of have the optimum body type for MMA. You know, you've often heard me say when you get these long, lean, tall fighters that are abnormally tall for their weight class, it does give them a big advantage. You know, if you've read the Fightnomics book, generally speaking, the longer a wingspan a fighter has within their weight class, the bigger the advantage that they have. And the problem with this body type is that the majority of fighters with this body type who are abnormally tall for their division, they tend to have bad takedown defense and weak wrestling to go along with it. Because if you think about it, when a fighter is tall, they've got to weigh in at the lightweight limit of 155 pounds, so they've got to lose the weight from somewhere, and usually they lose the weight from their legs. If you look at the majority of long, lean, tall fighters, they do have skinny legs, and that means they don't have the strongest base. So when they face wrestlers who shoot in deep on their hips, it's very easy for wrestlers to upset their balance and take them down. You know, you think of examples like Curtis Millender or Stefan Struve or, you know, Jalen Turner, another fighter we've seen recently with poor takedown defense. They are guys that have got the optimum body type for MMA, the best type of body type for MMA, but they're not able to realize their full potential because their takedown defense is terrible. But then every once in a while you do get a unicorn, the kind of fighter who has the optimum body type for MMA, the long, lean frame, the tall frame, abnormally long wingspan for the division, but they've also got good takedown defense and they can wrestle their ass off. And some good examples of this are, you know, John Jones, probably the greatest fighter of all time, Montel Jackson, Israel Adesanya is another good example of this. If you can get a fighter with this body type to also be able to defend takedowns and have a decent level of grappling, they're an absolute nightmare. You know, even Anderson Silva in his prime to some extent fitted that description because he was quite tall, was able to fight very long, and even though his takedown defense wasn't bulletproof, he was a nightmare on the ground and very strong in the clinch. And this fight is interesting because in Roosevelt Roberts we have another potential unicorn on our hands. He's 6'1", which is very tall for a lightweight, and his wrestling and grappling looks outstanding. I have been really impressed with the wrestling that I've seen from him. Obviously, he's still very inexperienced at 25 years old. He's 7-0, so there's a lot we don't know about him because throughout his career he has faced a relatively low level of opponent. But like I always say, it doesn't matter who you face, you can only fight what's put in front of you, and you should be able to determine how good someone is by the skills and techniques they show in their fights. And from what I'm seeing from Roosevelt Roberts, I'm very, very impressed, which means this guy could become a nightmare at the lightweight division, because he's got the perfect body type and the grappling to back it up, especially if he learns to fight long and use his range a little bit better than what he does at the moment. But this is a guy that's primarily a wrestler, strong grappler, very impressive. And this fight is an interesting fight to break down, because you have two guys with the same body type. They're both 6'1", they're both competing in the same weight division, and they both live at opposite ends of the spectrum. Remember, we said there are guys at the top of the food chain like John Jones, Israel Adesanya, Montel Jackson with the perfect body type and the grappling to go with it. And then we've got guys the other side of the spectrum with the same body type like Curtis Melender, Stefan Struve, Jalen Turner, but these guys have got absolutely garbage takedown defense. Completely opposite ends of the scale. And this fight's a really good illustration of that, because these guys do live at completely different ends of the scale. Roosevelt Roberts has got, great grappling, very technical grappler, strong wrestler, whereas Thomas Gifford, not so much. And let me show you what I'm talking about. Obviously, I never want to just go out there with blanket statements. I want to give you as much evidence as I can. And I would love to be able to produce these videos, being able to use footage of UFC fighters from UFC Fight Pass to justify everything I say. But it's obviously not possible because of copyright laws. But thankfully, most of the time, I'm able to use fight footage from promotions outside the UFC without my videos getting flagged for copyright. I think in the last 30 or so videos that I've done, only one video has been flagged for copyright. And that's basically because if you put a video from this promotion, Kansas City Fighting Association or whatever it's called, into your video, basically these guys get all the ad revenue from this video, so they don't actually lose out. By taking clips of their content, I'm not actually costing them anything, I'm not actually hurting them. If anything, I'm benefiting them, which is pretty cool. So, it's really strange how that one video got flagged for copyright, but hopefully it won't happen too much in the future, and I'm sure this one won't. So let's jump right into it. So I want to show you a little bit of footage of Thomas Gifford, so you can kind of gain an understanding of why Roosevelt Roberts is such a big favourite in this fight, and also why you can have two fighters with the same body type that is prone to a weakness, but how one type of fighter becomes very, very special if they're able to tighten that weakness up. So this is Thomas Gifford against Trey Ogden. They've actually fought twice. I'm going to be showing you both these fights, but this is the last time that he fought Ogden, back in July of 2018, so just under 1 year ago. So let's hit play on this, and as you can see, this is in the first round. This is about 45 seconds into the fight. This is Gifford here, in the grey shorts with the cornrows, and as you can see here, he makes a really big mistake, absolutely huge mistake. He drops Ogden with a nice shot here, just knocks him down, has him hurt, and then instead of going in for the kill, he actually pulls guard on a guillotine attempt. Now this works out for him on this occasion. He actually gets the submission here, but even though he got the submission and he got the win, it was a terrible decision. 9 times out of 10, when you're facing UFC level guys, if you pull guard on a guillotine attempt like that, even when your opponent's hurt, they're going to be able to either step over into half guard and defend the choke, or they're just going to be able to survive and hang in there and force you to tire your arms out and eventually let go of the choke, and then they wind up in top position. So this was a really, really bad piece of fight IQ from Gifford. I mean, he got away with it. I'm happy that he won, but it wasn't the smartest thing to do. When he had Ogden hurt here, he should have tried to finish the fight with ground and pound, not pull guard. That was a very, very dumb thing to do, because there's only 4 minutes. There's still 4 minutes to go in this first round. Imagine if Ogden would have been able to fight out of this position and been able to maintain top position for the next 4 minutes. He probably would have ended up winning the round. So really, really bad fight IQ from Gifford, which gives us the first clue as to why Roosevelt might be a big favourite in this fight. And then we go on to the other time that Gifford has fought Ogden. This was back in late 2017. So again, it is important to point out that Gifford is only 26 years old, and he will be making massive improvements from fight to fight. But obviously, we've got to evaluate him based on his past performances, so it's important to show you this stuff. So then we go into the second matchup, and this is again in the first round. We see Trey Ogden very early on into this fight shoots a takedown on Gifford and gets it very easily. Watch how he shoots in here. Gifford practically jumps to the ground, which is really bad takedown defense. But again, you see him already trying to fish for this guillotine, set it up. He doesn't have it here because Ogden is in half guard, that position I just mentioned in the last fight. It makes it very difficult to get a guillotine choke from half guard. He needs a very, very nice guillotine to be able to complete the submission from that position. But then Gifford's able to get control of Ogden's body. Notice how he switched to full guard, got the body triangle in play to create extra torque on the guillotine. And he finishes this fight exactly like he finished the other fight against Ogden. So I'm guessing Ogden's guillotine defense needs some work. So again though guys, don't focus on the finish. You know, I'm happy Gifford won, it's all cool, it's all great, but look at how bad this takedown defense is. When Ogden shoots in, Gifford practically leaps to his back. You know, maybe that's, he's confident he can submit this guy with a guillotine, but generally speaking, 9 times out of 10, fighting with takedown defense that bad, pulling guard, going for long shot guillotines, it's going to wind up putting yourself in bad positions against UFC level guys. And in this fight against Bryant Whittaker, which is from way back in early 2016, this fight kind of illustrates the trouble that a guy like Gifford can get themselves into by giving up takedowns easily and going for these long shot submissions that wind up with you on your back in a bad position. Now, obviously this fight is a long time ago. I think Gifford probably would have been 23, 24 years old when this fight took place. So obviously he's going to have improved a lot since then. But he hasn't fought that many times since this fight when you take into consideration, okay, he has fought a lot of times since this fight, but the point I'm trying to make is he hasn't got a lot of real competitive experience since this fight took place. You know, the vast majority of the fights since he fought Whittaker have ended very early on. He doesn't have a lot of competitive in-cage experience. And this fight is just full of red flags, to be honest with you. Gifford is the guy in the luminous yellow shorts, and I'm just going to play you some footage here. So this is into the first round, and very, very, very early on, you'll see Whittaker get a very easy takedown. This is the first round. He's going to shoot in any second now. Any second is coming. There you go. Shoots a nice deep double leg takedown. Again, Gifford practically falls to his back. And the most concerning thing about this is that Gifford is the one good thing that Gifford's got on his side here. Even though his takedown defense is garbage, he is close to the cage, which means he could potentially get his back tight to the cage and use the cage to stand back up. But he doesn't do that for whatever reason. Keeps fishing for long shot guillotines the whole round. And I don't want this video to go on to be super long, so I'm just going to skip through. But as you can see, the entire first round makes no real attempt to get back to his feet. He even goes to the body triangle here. I saw it there for a second. Where was it? Here. You can see Gifford going to the body triangle, which is a real big annoyance of mine, a real big issue I have, because when you go to the body triangle, you are basically accepting being on the bottom, and as we know, more often than not, being on the bottom in MMA is a losing position. So when you go to the body triangle, you have no way to threaten with submissions, really, no way to work your way back to your feet, no way to improve your position. You're basically just trying to tie your opponent up, and if you're on the bottom and tying your opponent up and allowing them to stay on top, you are basically handing a win to your opponent on a plate. So when I see fighters go to the body triangle from the bottom, it is a sign of very bad fight IQ, a big lack of experience, and just not really understanding how MMA fights are scored and what you need to do to win. This is a very, very bad sign. And I'll continue what I was saying throughout the entire first round. Gifford makes no real attempt to get back to his feet, gets dominated from top position, and Whittaker cruises really and wins that round easily. Here we go, it's going to be the end of the first round any second, and now we're into the second round, and you can guess what's going to happen again very early on in this round, guys. There's a little bit of a feeling out process at the beginning of this second round. You know, both guys just exchanging shots, but ultimately we know what's coming. Whittaker's felt Gifford out on the ground. He knows he's weak off his back. He knows he's got bad takedown defense. It's only going to be a matter of time before a smart fighter exposes this and looks to get the fight to the ground again. Here we see Whittaker just focusing on his defense, staying out of trouble. And it's only going to be a matter of time before he shoots in on another takedown here. And we can see Gifford in these open striking exchanges, not particularly dangerous. You know, he is what he is. He's very average, nothing special about him, nothing particularly dangerous. And obviously has gaping holes when it comes to his grappling takedown offense. Again, Whittaker shoots a nice deep double leg takedown there, but Gifford doesn't really attempt to stuff it and just falls to his back. And you can guess what happens here. Again, for pretty much the entire round, Gifford just really doesn't make that much of an attempt to get back to his feet. Whittaker just shuts him down from top position, and for the entire remainder of the round manages to maintain top position. We're now into the third round, and in this third round, again guys, you don't need to be a psychic or a rocket scientist to guess what happens. This is very early on at the beginning of the third round. Whittaker, exactly like the second round in the first round, buys his time, picks the right time to strike, threatens a takedown there, but Gifford actually did a really good job of reading it and shutting it down. Went to the choke there to try and stuff the takedown, but again, Whittaker manages to complete a very, very easy takedown here with Gifford practically falling to his back. And you can guess what happened. Gifford stayed on his back for pretty much the remainder of the third round, getting absolutely dominated from top position. Very, 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 very concerning and poor from Gifford. But he's a young guy. He will improve from fight to fight, and I'm sure he has improved a lot since he fought Whittaker way back in 2016. But obviously, based on the footage I've just shown you, you can understand why Roosevelt is a big favourite. I wish that I could show you footage of Roosevelt, but I can't, because obviously UFC Fight Pass footage is copyright protected. But trust me, Roosevelt Roberts is a very skilled grappler, very technical grappler, a very strong wrestler. So if we take a look at the odds at the moment, the current average odds on Roberts are around about 1.27, which is minus 370, which gives him an implied probability of 79%. And then if we go and see the odds for Gifford, currently around about an average of 4.15, which is plus 315 for an implied probability of 24%. Based on what I've just shown you, you could probably tell that there's no way you can bet Gifford. He's a terrible bet. Definitely would not bet on Gifford here. But Roosevelt, I really like what I've seen from him, guys. I really, really like what I've seen from him, and I'm sure Gifford has improved a little bit since since that fight back in 2016 against Whittaker. But then in his last fight back in October, he went to a split decision against a guy with a 2-0 record. Now, Chris Brown might be amazing. He might be a really talented up-and-coming fighter. I don't know anything about him, but if you go into a split decision with a guy that's got a record of 2-0, generally that's a bad sign. And I mean, he probably hasn't improved that much at all. This is probably one of these guys that's just got a very nice guillotine, and he's catching loads of low-level guys, low-level grapplers on the regional circuit in Kansas with them. That's pretty much what this is, I would say. So, looking at the footage I've watched, Gifford really only has a puncher's chance here. And, if Roosevelt Roberts weighs in and he looks decent at the weigh-ins, he looks healthy, he makes weight, there's no problems, he's probably a safe pick for your parlays or your accumulators. I wouldn't bet him straight at these odds. He's too big of a favourite, but certainly seems like quite a safe bet to me. Very strong grappler, very technical. I do like what I'm seeing from him a lot. I am quite high on Roosevelt Roberts, so definitely someone to throw into your parlays, your accumulators, if you're placing those kind of bets this weekend. And also, even though he's expensive, I would definitely consider him for a DraftKings pick as well, because he is quite aggressive, quite offensive on the ground, never gives up top position, really aggressive with the ground and pound, does really threaten with his submissions as well. So I like Roosevelt Roberts in this fight, even as a big favourite. Then we move on to the next fight that I want to talk about in today's video, and I'm really sorry if the lighting in this video just got shit. I don't know, it started raining. I don't know if you can see in the background, but when I began recording this video, it was nice and sunny outside and the lighting was all perfect, and I've just noticed as I've started talking that it's got really dark in this room, and I've just turned around to see that it's absolutely pouring down with rain at the moment. That is British weather for you. Rains all the time, and when you think the sun's coming out, guaranteed 10-20 minutes later it's going to start raining again. So I am sorry if the quality of this of the lighting is shit. The British weather's caught me out on this occasion, but I will try and fix it in future. I'll try and do my best to study the weather reports, or, you know, get a barometer or something. But fuck it, even though you can't see my face because it's probably engulfed in shadows, I'm going to keep talking anyway. As long as you can see my screen, that's all that matters. Let's go on to the next fight between Gilbert Burns and Mike Davis. So Mike Davis is a guy with a 7-1 record who is stepping up to take this fight on just 2 weeks' notice. And remember, whenever you see that, you should always consider betting the guy not taking a fight on short notice or not making their UFC debut, because we know a massive percentage of fighters that make their UFC debut lose, and an even bigger percentage of fighters that make their debut lose when they're taking their debut on short notice. And remember, a lot of guys get their shot in the UFC by doing the UFC a favour, stepping up on short notice and filling in for fighters that have been injured. And obviously Gilbert Burns is a tough matchup for anyone because he's developing KO power in his strikes, he's improving his cardio, he's developing as a fighter, he's learning to pace himself better, and he's obviously an absolute nightmare on the ground. Gilbert Burns has a super high level ground game, so he's going to be a tricky matchup for anyone in the UFC's. Is this fight a featherweight? I'm pretty sure it's a lightweight. Yeah, sorry, I just saw that Mike Davis was a featherweight here, but I was pretty sure that he was... that this fight was at lightweight, and it is. Okay, so looks like Davis has jumped around between featherweight and lightweight. So I guess that's a bit of a bonus if you're stepping up on short notice. At least he doesn't have a big cut to featherweight. At least he's fighting at lightweight. That's one positive. But obviously Gilbert Burns, no picnic for anyone. And I have been impressed with Mike Davis from what I've seen. Very, very, very impressed. He is a very technical, very skilled kickboxer. He went the distance against Sodiq Yusuff on Dana White's Contender Series, and we all know how Yusuff is good. If you go back and watch this fight, it was a very, very good fight, very competitive. Yusuff won the fight, there's no doubt about that, but Davis pushed him all the way, and it was a very competitive matchup. So that tells you how good Davis is. But this is a classic striker versus grappler matchup. Gilbert Burns, primarily a grappler, and he has a huge advantage on the ground, whereas Mike Davis is primarily a striker, and I do give Davis the advantage if it stays standing. You know, Gilbert Burns is improving his striking a lot. He's now developed knockout power over the last few years, but Davis has got a very good chin, throws a high volume of strikes per round, throws a wide range of strikes as well, and he gets better as the fight goes on. I like Davis a lot. I am quite a big fan of him, and I think even though this is a tough matchup, even if he loses, I do see him doing quite well in the UFC. So where do we go with talking about this fight from here? So, knowing that this is a striker versus grappler matchup, obviously I give Burns a bigger advantage. Obviously, I think Burns is a better grappler and striker than Davis is a strike. What I'm trying to say is Burns has a bigger advantage over Davis when it comes to grappling because of Burns' grappling credentials than Davis' advantage when it comes to striking. I don't know if that makes sense. I know what I'm trying to say in my head, but I'm struggling to get my words out. But I guess what I'm trying to say is Burns has an enormous advantage in one area, while Davis only has a slight advantage in one area, which is striking. I hope that comes across and you get what I mean. So this fight really boils down to whether or not Mike Davis is going to be able to keep this fight standing. Because obviously if it goes to the ground, he's in big trouble against Gilbert Burns. And that is impossible to tell, to be honest with you, which is very, very annoying because the vast majority of Davis's career fights have taken place in a promotion called Island Fights. And one really annoying thing about Island Fights is that they love action, they love striking fights. You know, they even have their fights in a boxing ring. They just love, you know, stand-up fights, striking fights. So for that reason, whenever you see an Island Fights matchup, 9 times out of 10, it's going to be a stand-up fight. You'll very rarely see action on the ground. You know, to give you an example, one of the most recognisable fighters to come out of the Island Fights promotion over the last few years is Mike Perry. We all know what kind of fighter Mike Perry is, and that's annoying because we want to know what chance Mike Davis has got of keeping this fight standing, and because he's only ever really fought strikers, we've never really seen his takedown defense truly tested, and we know Gilbert Burns has a very, very nice deep reactive double leg takedown that he really commits hard to, and he also does a really good job of chaining his takedowns into other takedowns if his opponent stuffs the initial takedown attempt. So for me, guys, based on the fact that we know nothing about Mike Davis's takedown defense, this fight is unbettable for me. I mean, if we look at the odds on Gilbert Burns at the moment, he's around 1.40. That's money line odds of -250 for an implied probability of 71%. You know what, I wouldn't bet Burns at these odds because, like I say, I give Davis the advantage. He's decent. He's a very, very good fighter, guys. And if he has decent takedown defense, which he may have, and he's able to keep this fight standing, I actually think he'll win. But at the same time, we can't bet Davis because the average odds are around about 3.0, which is plus 200. That gives him an implied probability of 33%. But if his takedown defense is absolutely garbage, because he is primarily a striker, Burns is going to toy with him on the ground, tie him up in knots, and absolutely dominate. So I can't bet this fight, guys. It is an easy pass for me. And we now move on to the final fight that I want to talk about in today's video, which is going to be Jim Miller against Jason Gonzalez. Now, this fight, I'm going to say something a little bit crazy to kick off this breakdown, and I'm actually going to say that Jim Miller and Jason Gonzalez are a bad matchup for each other. So I think Jim Miller is a bad matchup for Gonzalez, and I also think Gonzalez is a bad matchup for Jim Miller, which is completely contradictory. It doesn't make any sense, but hopefully it will make more sense by the time I finish saying everything I've got to say about this fight. I know it sounds silly, but bear with me. So a lot of people are writing off Jason Gonzalez in this matchup, and I get it. His record is very underwhelming. He's got a pro MMA record of 11-4. He's 33 years old, which means that's quite a low number of fights for a fighter of that age. And his record's a little bit salty, to be honest with you. Has struggled against some low-level guys like Abner Lovaras in the past. Although no real shame in losing to Drew Dober or an absolute beast and potential future champion in Gregor Gillespie. It's also worth noting that Gonzalez has been out for, you know, over 2 years now. So that is also a bit of a concern, you know. How has he been able to support himself? How has he been able to pay for training, dieting, coaching? You know, is he having to work a full-time job on the side to support himself? You know, at 33 years old, there's a good chance he's got kids as well. Being out for this period of time is not easy because he wouldn't have been making any type of serious money from these fights. You know, fighters that come off the Ultimate Fighter are often on, you know, $10,000 to win, $10,000 to show, and then a $10,000 win bonus if they win. And if we look at his fights in the UFC since losing on the Ultimate Fighter, he lost to Drew Dober, so he probably only got paid $10,000 here. He wouldn't have been getting paid much in RFA. He wasn't even the main event. So in this calendar year, 2016, he probably only made, you know, $10,000 to $15,000 max. Then in 2017, he beat JC Cottrell, so he probably got the win bonus for that. So he probably made $20,000 for this fight. But then against Gregor Gillespie, he only would have made probably $10,000 for this fight. So in 2017, he only would have made $30,000. By the time you pay coaches, training fees, taxes, you know, all kinds of expenses, living costs, rent, food, family, how's he supported himself on $30,000 since then? So that's a big concern. If he's working a full-time job, how much time and energy has he been able to dedicate to training? You know, is he got the money to eat good? Has he got the money to pay for strength and conditioning coaches? A whole load of shit on the economical side of things that makes fighting difficult, particularly as you get older, because obviously, as you know, as you get older, you get more responsibilities. I couldn't survive on, well, if we think about it, if he earned $30,000 in 2017, that means, you know, 2017, 2018, we're now into 2019, he's probably only had $10,000 per year from fighting on average to support himself, which is an absolute nightmare. I'd be fucking homeless if I had to try and survive on $10,000 with the cost of living the way they are in the UK. And it shows here that he lives in California. We know the cost of living very, very high in California. So he's probably working a full-time job to support himself, which isn't easy. And it's definitely a concern that he's been out since 2017. How motivated is he to fight? So, despite all the things that I've just said about Gonzalez, I do think he is one of these guys that is better than his record suggests. If you go back and watch his fight against Gregor Gillespie, he did cause Gillespie some problems. You could actually argue that he caused Gillespie more problems than anyone else has been able to cause Gillespie in the UFC. Actually had Gillespie rocked a couple of times, and in that fight, Gonzalez showed off his devastating head kicks. I mean, he's got legit KO power in every head kick, and a big part of that comes from his size. You know, we just talked about how size, you know, the longer your wingspan, generally speaking, the better the advantage you have. It's an optimum style, optimum body type for MMA. And at 6'2", being a lightweight, this is a big guy with a brilliant body type for MMA. Unfortunately, he leans more towards the Curtis Melender style of fighting, where he doesn't have very good takedown defense. He's one of these guys that pays the price for having the optimum body type, but his takedown defense is improving, and he is very offensive on the ground. He's constantly attacking submissions, constantly looking to improve his position, which is a big deal under the new scoring in MMA. So the part of the reason why he is so devastating with his head kicks is because at 6'2", when he's fighting guys like Jim Miller, which are only 5'8", physics tells you that difference in height makes it much easier for a taller guy to land head kicks on a shorter guy. And Gonzalez's head kicks are devastating. I definitely think his record is better than I definitely think he is better than his record suggests. And he is also making big improvements from fight to fight. But what is crazy about this matchup is that Gonzalez is 33 years old, Miller's 35 years old, which means Miller's only 2 years older, which is kind of insane, because we look at a guy like Jason Gonzalez as a new guy coming into the UFC, an up-and-coming guy making improvements from fight to fight, kind of like a young guy, young prospect. And then Miller, we think of him as being around forever. I mean, this is a guy with over 40 pro fights, so many wars. I mean, in terms of biological age, these fighters are only 2 years apart, but they may as well be 102 years apart when you talk about miles on the clock. The amount of miles Miller has put on his body, the amount of injuries he's gone through, the amount of wars he's been in the cage is just completely different. And even though there is only a 2 year difference, I do see Gonzalez as a fighter on the way up and improving from fight to fight, whereas I do see signs that Father Time is starting to catch up with Miller and he's on a steep decline. Now, it is difficult to measure this decline because over the last few years, the majority of Miller's fights have ended very quickly. We can see the last time that he fought to a decision was way back in 2017. And since then, the 3 fights that he's competed in have ended very quickly, which kind of makes it difficult for us to gauge where he's at this stage in his career. But if you go back and watch these fights against Trinaldo and Pettis in particular, there are signs that he really is starting to decline. Because in these fights, around about the halfway mark of the fight, he started to slow down. And Miller's always been one of these warriors, one of these guys that you practically have to kill in order to beat, one of these guys that, will just fight till his last breath, and tremendous heart. But if you go and watch his fight against Francisco Trinaldo, something actually really concerning happened in this matchup. At the end of the second round, Miller said to his corner man, "I've got nothing left to give." And that was a really, really important moment in Miller's career, I think, because Miller's not the kind of guy that would say that. He's always a guy that would go out on his shield, the heart of a warrior, the heart of a lion. And that for me was potentially a turning point. And obviously hasn't done great since then. Obviously he beat Alex White, but when he slowed down midway through the fight against Trinaldo and said, "I've got nothing else left to give," that was a bit of a concern for me. And 2 years further down the line now against Gonzalez, will he have declined even more than what we saw from him in this fight against Trinaldo? Because let's face it, guys, there are a lot of issues with Jim Miller, a hell of a lot of issues. We just talk about the miles on his clock, how many wars he's been in, how many injuries he's suffered, and also, the injuries that he's suffered throughout his career do tend to be recurring injuries. Like, he's had a lot of issues with his hands throughout his career, breaking his hands, hand injuries. And another concerning thing is in his last fight, he did say that this was the first time really in his career that someone had been able to finish him quickly, aside from the Hooker loss. Throughout the majority of his career, he's been able to, get into these wars, and he's been difficult to get out of there. But, two quick losses against Oliveira and Hooker over the last couple of years isn't good. But in his last fight against Charles Oliveira, he potentially picked up another recurring injury. He actually revealed in his Fight Week interview this week that he lost this fight. It goes down as being by rear naked choke, but he actually lost this fight because when Charles Oliveira took him down, he dislocated his shoulder, which means he couldn't use one arm to defend the rear naked choke. And I just want to play you this interview from Jim Miller this week, where he basically talks a little bit about the injury that he sustained in his last fight against Charles Oliveira. So what he's about to say here is another red flag. I just want you to hear him say it.
took a little time off trying to heal up, and got back into it.
What was the recovery time off that injury? Because obviously, it's less than 5 months since that fight, so it couldn't have been that bad, right?
It's still, I still feel it here and there. I'm going to tell you a mildly embarrassing story. Before I got, I'd gotten PRP done, and before I started my physical therapy and stuff like that, I made spaghetti and meatballs for my kids, and I'm bringing my younger daughter a meatball on a spatula, and it slipped off the spatula, and not thinking about it, I just snatched it out of the air, and it was like throwing it back out again, because I caught a meatball. so it's like I've had to deal with it, I've had to deal with it in training. I've been doing physical therapy, trying to strengthen the joint and strengthen the muscles around it. I probably could have gotten surgery done, but at this point we'll postpone that as long as we can, and just move on.
Meatballs can be serious business.
Dude, it's like,
So obviously what Miller said there is a bit of a concern, guys, talking quite openly about the dislocated shoulder that he suffered against Charles Oliveira, basically saying that it's still causing him problems, and it has only been 5 months since this fight, and he also hinted that he's had to change the way he trains. So will that have an impact on his cardio now that he's not able to do the same training or train as hard? He also said that he re-dislocated it. It popped out again when he was making meatballs and spaghetti for his children. So imagine if something like that, something as small as that, like a quick sudden movement, is enough to throw his shoulder out of the socket. Imagine what an MMA fight might do with all that grappling, defending takedowns, fighting for underhooks, throwing strikes, blocking strikes. Jason Gonzalez has vicious head kicks. If grabbing to catch a meatball is enough to dislocate your shoulder, imagine what it might do if Gonzalez throws a nasty head kick and Miller puts his arm up to block it and catches one of Gonzalez's kicks on his forearm or shoulder. Will that be enough to jar the shoulder and dislocate it? So obviously that's a really big concern with Miller, potentially have a recurring dislocated shoulder injury coming into this fight. And also, we can't ignore the fact that Jim Miller suffers from Lyme disease, which is really unlucky and really unfortunate, and I feel really bad for him. But here we can see from this post on Instagram from almost 1 year ago, where he says that he takes 31 capsules a day of medication and supplements to battle his Lyme disease, and this can't be good for you guys. We know that Lyme disease destroys your metabolism, wrecks your energy levels, your mood. It is devastating. And if you've ever been on medication, just one medication can change the way you feel, have an impact on your cardio, have an impact on your motivation, your drive and your mood. So taking 31 different medications and supplements a day cannot be good. What effect is this having on Jim Miller? So needless to say, after all the red flags I've just discussed with Jim Miller, there's a lot to unpack in this fight, but also a lot to unpack with Gonzalez. He's been out for 2 years. His takedown defense is improving from fight to fight, but it's always been his Achilles heel, and it's not bulletproof. And we know that Jim Miller's got a very nice deep reactive double leg takedown, and Miller's always a nightmare on the ground. Miller's strength is on the ground. He's a high level Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, and although Gonzalez is very skilled on the ground, he does a good job at defending himself. There are still levels of this game. Miller's definitely a level above Gonzalez. So this fight is an interesting one, because early on, if Miller's able to take Gonzalez down, I do think he can cause him big trouble. But if Gonzalez is able to weather the early storm, drag Miller into the second and third round, I do think this fight can get very interesting, because with all the injuries, the recurring injuries, the Lyme disease, the potential back in 2017, the Miller was on a steep decline in that fight against Francisco Trinaldo and also against Anthony Pettis. There are a lot of red flags here with Jim Miller. So I do think that Gonzalez is a live dog. So let's have a look at the underdog. So if we look at the odds on Jim Miller at the moment, current average odds on him are around 1.70. which is minus 143 for an implied probability of around 59%. Based on everything I've just seen, it's no surprise that I think there is no way you can bet Jim Miller. There's just too many red flags with him. So if we then look at the odds on Jason Gonzalez, he's currently around about an average of 2.25, which is plus 125 for an implied probability of 44%. And I do think those odds are pretty accurate, guys, because obviously Miller has a huge advantage on the ground, but I would be very tempted to bet Gonzalez if his odds improved a little. If we could get Gonzalez at around about 2.50, which would be plus 150 for an implied probability of 40%, I think he'd be worth a gamble at those odds, just because I think he's tough enough to weather the early storm, he's skilled enough to weather the early storm, and I feel that there's a significant chance Miller's coming into this fight depleted, struggling with injuries, and just not ready for a younger, hungrier, fresher, more athletic guy like Gonzalez, who will fight at a high pace, carries legit KO power in every strike, and who's just vicious and nasty and aggressive and tough. So I do like Gonzalez in this fight. I don't like him at the current odds, but again, this is only Thursday. This is 2-3 days before the event takes place. We see a lot of line movement on fight day. The majority of people will not have heard of Jason Gonzalez. A lot of people bet on fights based on win-loss records. They just go on Wikipedia and cap fights that way. They don't really go into as much depth as me. So if you're looking at Gonzalez's record, it's very underwhelming over the last few years. You know, even though Miller's record over the last few years is terrible as well, he's still a name that people will recognise. His odds are relatively good. I wouldn't be surprised to see money coming in on Miller, which would improve the odds on Gonzalez. So, as well as Augusto Sakai, Jason Gonzalez is another fighter that I've got my eye on over the next few days. I'm not sure whether I will bet him or not, but I definitely am keeping an eye on his odds. So that is it for today's video, guys. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please hit the like button below, and also these videos are getting loads of views and I don't have as many subscribers as the number of views they're getting, so please, if you haven't subscribed yet, do that already. It makes me feel very happy every time I get a new subscriber. But take care, guys, and I will be back. Well, I hope I'll be back. Remember, this week is crazy now. Over the next 48 hours, I've got to research all of Bellator, all of KSW 48, and I've still got 3 fights left to research on this UFC card. So my workload's building up. I will promise you, I will do my best to get part 4 of this video out. But if I don't, take care, and I will see you guys on Monday with the first breakdown video for the next card, which is Al Iaquinta against Donald Cerrone. So take care, guys. If I don't see you, have a great weekend. I love you all, and thanks for your support.
Too many thoughts on my mind, I can't sleep at night, so I just keep writing. I don't need no help, I don't need opinions, so don't waste my time then. I just been living online, my city don't show me no loving, that's fine. Fuck local radio stations, I got more plays than all of these rappers combined. I'm going again, I've been going in, I'm fed up with so many things, I gotta just let it all out. I'm talking about the shit they've been talking.